It was a rainy night when a small knock echoed through the mansion of billionaire CEO Thomas Hale, a man who had it all but felt empty inside. On the other side of the door stood a little girl, drenched and shivering. She looked up at him with tearful eyes and whispered, "Mom just died. She sent me to you." In that moment, his entire world, and everything he thought he knew, shattered. This is not just a story. It's a piece of someone's hidden pain, quietly waiting to be heard. In today's story, we dive into a moment that can change everything, in the most unexpected way. Before we begin, where are you listening from? Canada, the US, Norway? Let us know in the comments, because stories may begin anywhere, but they connect us all. Stay with us until the very end, because sometimes, what breaks your heart can also heal it. And if you believe stories can change lives, hit subscribe. Join our journey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment. Your voice matters here. Sometimes the past doesn't knock. It arrives with the eyes of a child, and a truth that breaks you open. The sky over the city had never looked so bleak. Gray, almost colorless, as if it too mourned something unsaid. On the 46th floor of a towering glass building in the heart of Manhattan, Elias Monroe sat in a leather chair far too soft for the hard weight in his chest. The CEO of Monroe Dynamics, a company built on innovation and ruthless ambition, Elias had long traded vulnerability for efficiency, traded his past for progress. To the world, he was a vision of success at tailored suits, a penthouse view, and a mind that turned every failure into fortune. But behind the polished glass walls of his empire, there was a silence no conference call could fill. The echo of a life left unfinished, of a chapter he thought he'd closed decades ago. He had lovers, yes. Success, endlessly. But love, family? That had been a door he'd shut and sealed tight, until today. It began with a knock, gentle, almost unsure, on the heavy oak door of his private estate in Connecticut. His estate manager wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever came uninvited here. Especially not in the pouring rain. Elias had just returned from a quarterly shareholder meeting, drenched in corporate tension and champagne. He didn't answer the door himself. Sam, the butler, did. But it was Elias who heard the words from the hallway. Words that cut through every layer of his carefully constructed detachment. "She said to come to you if anything happened. She said you'd know what to do." Sam's voice trembled. "Sir, I think you should see this." When Elias stepped into the grand foyer, he wasn't prepared for the sight before him. A little girl, no older than 7, soaking wet, arms wrapped around a crumpled brown teddy bear, her hair plastered to her forehead, shivering. But it was her eyes, wide, dark, heavy with something far beyond her years, that stole the air from his lungs. "I'm Ivy," she whispered. He swallowed. "And what are you doing here?" She clutched the bear tighter. "My mom just died," she said. Her lips quivered. "She sent me to you." The world stopped. Elias Monroe, the man who prided himself on never losing control, suddenly couldn't breathe. Her face, there was something in it. A familiarity. A ghost from the past. A memory that clawed its way up from the depths of a life he'd buried long ago. Could it be her? Could Ivy's mother be the one woman he had loved and lost? The questions swirled like a storm, but the little girl just stood there, small, alone, and certain that the man before her held the answers. And just like that, the door Elias had sealed shut creaked open again. But what lay behind it would not only change his life, it would unearth secrets, shatter illusions, and test every part of his soul. This is not just a story of grief. It's a story of truth, of redemption, and of a child's unwavering belief in something Elias had long forgotten: love. The rain had not stopped. It poured relentlessly over the Monroe estate like the world itself was mourning with the small child who now stood inside its vast, echoing foyer. Ivy's shoes squelched against the marble floor, her thin frame shivering beneath a threadbare coat that had seen better days. The teddy bear she held was missing an eye, its fur matted and darkened with age and dampness, but it remained clutched in her arms like an anchor keeping her afloat in unfamiliar waters. Elias Monroe watched her silently, his mind racing through fragments of the past he hadn't allowed himself to touch in years. He couldn't remember the last time a child had been this close to him. Maybe never. His life had never allowed room for children, not since. His chest tightened. He pushed the thought away. "Ivy, is it?" he asked, his voice more cautious than commanding. She nodded. Her lips pressed together, trembling but determined. She looked around the mansion, high ceilings, gold fixtures, cold modern luxury, and it was clear she didn't belong here. "Not yet." Elias crouched, lowering himself to her level, careful not to appear intimidating. "Who was your mother?" There was a pause, a long one. She glanced down at the bear. When she spoke, it was like unsealing a vault. Her name was Clara. The name hit him like a car crash in slow motion. Clara. His breath caught in his throat. Not because he didn't remember, but because he had never truly forgotten. Clara Maywell, the only woman who ever truly challenged him. Brilliant, defiant, impossibly kind. They'd met in college at Columbia, back when Elias still had dreams that didn't come with dollar signs. Back before he learned that love didn't always win, they'd parted under heavy silence. No angry words, no dramatic closure. Just life, ambition, and timing carving a chasm too wide to cross. He had left for London to chase his first big investment deal. She had stayed in New York. He'd written once. She never replied. He hadn't seen her since. Clara. Elias whispered the name like it was sacred. Your mother was Clara Maywell. Ivy's eyes lit up with cautious hope. You knew her. I did? Elias said almost too quietly. A long time ago. The butler, Sam, lingered awkwardly by the door, unsure if he should stay or leave. Elias waved him off with a glance. This wasn't something that needed an audience. Come, he said to Ivy, gesturing gently. Let's get you warm. She followed him up the staircase, her tiny wet shoes leaving prints on the pristine marble steps. Elias couldn't help but steal glances at her. The sharp curve of her chin, the way her eyes narrowed slightly when she was unsure, there were echoes of Clara in all of it. It was like seeing a ghost made flesh. He led her into a guest suite, one of the warmer, softer ones, away from the colder, corporate feel of the rest of the house. The fireplace roared to life with a flick of a switch, and he pulled out a thick towel from the linen closet. She didn't flinch when he handed it to her. She just started drying herself off in slow, meticulous movements as if this routine had been learned without luxury for years. Do you have anyone else? He asked gently. A relative. A family friend. She shook her head. Just you. How did you get here? Mom gave me a bus ticket. She had it in a little envelope with your name. She said if anything happened to her I should come here. She said you'd take care of me. Elias sank into the armchair, gripping the edges. Did she tell you who I am? Evie hesitated, then nodded. She said you're a very important man, that you help build things. But she also said that once, a long time ago, you helped build her heart. Then you broke it. Her honesty was disarming. Elias looked away, guilt flickering in his chest like a spark looking for oxygen. I didn't mean to. She never said you did, Ivy replied softly. She said life was heavy, and people sometimes drop things they love without meaning to. Silence hung between them, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Elias stood and walked toward the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Below, his garden looked like a painting blurred by grief. He hadn't planned for this. He wasn't ready, but something in her presence, the sheer courage it took for a little girl to cross cities alone, soaked in grieving, moved something in him. Something buried deep beneath years of success, power, and solitude. He turned back to her. You must be hungry. She nodded. I'll have Mrs. She nodded. Delaney, prepare something warm. As he walked to the intercom, her voice stopped him. Did you love her? Ivy asked. He froze. Yes, Elias said. More than I ever said. The air in the room shifted, and then Ivy, still damp and tired, climbed up onto the bed with her bear and whispered, Then please don't leave me too. Elias felt something crack inside, and in the quiet crackle of the fire he didn't yet realize, the past wasn't done with him. It had only just begun to knock. Elias stood in the doorway for a moment after Ivy drifted off to sleep, her little body curled around the teddy bear like it was a lifeline. The firelight flickered across her face, casting shadows that reminded him far too much of Clara, the same soft jawline, the same flutter in her eyelids when she dreamed. He couldn't deny it anymore. Ivy was hers. And maybe, just maybe, his too. He closed the door quietly and made his way back downstairs, each step heavier than the last. The mansion, usually echoing with silence and perfection, now felt full. Not noisy, not chaotic, but alive in a way it hadn't been in years. The scent of wet wool and firewood lingered in the air. He poured himself a scotch in the study and stared into the amber liquid, hoping it held answers. How had Clara raised a child on her own? Why hadn't she ever told him? His thoughts spiraled. Did she hate him that much? Had she truly believed he wasn't capable of being a father? Or had she, like so many women burdened with too much and helped by too few, decided it was easier to carry the weight alone? The rain outside began to fade into a gentle drizzle, but inside Elias, the storm only worsened. He walked to the corner of his office where an old safe sat embedded into the wall. It hadn't been opened in years. Inside were things from another life. Photos, letters, old film reels, fragments of a boy who'd once believed in love. With a deep breath, he turned the dial. Click. He pulled out a small box. Dust clung to the velvet edges. Inside it were a few pictures, one of Clara in college, barefoot in a park, sunlight dancing across her face. Another of the two of them at graduation, her head on his shoulder. There were letters too. Ones he had written but never sent. Words soaked in regret, ambition, pride. He held one of the letters in his hand. It was dated nearly 8 years ago. Dear Clara, I saw someone today who reminded me of you. It was unbearable. He folded it shut. It was too late for words now, but not too late for truth. The next morning came with a soft gold sun stretching across the sky, cutting through the gray that had loomed for days. Elias hadn't slept. When he entered the dining room, Ivy was already there, sitting properly at the edge of a chair too big for her, legs swinging gently. Mrs. Delaney. The housekeeper had placed a plate of waffles in front of her, but Ivy was merely poking at them with a fork. Morning, Elias said carefully. She looked up, wiping her mouth with a napkin like someone who had been taught strict manners. Morning. He sat across from her. Sleep okay? She nodded. You're very brave, Ivy. Her eyes flickered. Mom said sometimes being brave means doing things even when you're scared. She was right. A beat passed. She stared down at her plate. I don't know what happens now, she whispered. Do I stay here? Or do I go to a place for kids without parents? Elias's heart twisted. You're not going to any place like that. But you don't know me? I'm getting to know you, he said gently. And I knew your mother. That means something. Do you think she was scared when she died? Her voice cracked slightly. She told me not to cry, but I did. A lot. Elias reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. It was a foreign gesture to him, intimate, raw, but it felt like the only thing to do. I think your mom was strong, but I also think she was human, and it's okay to cry. I do too. Just not where anyone can see. She gave him a sad smile. Mom used to say crying was just the body letting out the things the heart couldn't carry alone. He nodded, throat tight. That sounds like something she'd say. Ivy finally picked up a piece of waffle and took a small bite. Do you think she wanted you to be my dad? That word hit Elias like a freight train. I don't know what she wanted exactly, he said honestly. But I do know she sent you here for a reason. And that means I have a responsibility to you. Not just because of who your mother was, but because you deserve someone who shows up. Someone who doesn't walk away. Ivy stared at him with an intensity that seemed too deep for her age. Then promise me something. What? Promise you won't disappear. I promise, he said without hesitation. They sat in silence for a moment longer before Ivy looked toward the window. Is it okay if I see her room? Elias froze. Her room, Mom's room, she said. She told me she stayed here once. A long time ago. Elias's breath caught. Clara had stayed here, just once more than a decade ago. It was a weekend he'd tried to forget. The weekend she almost told him something, and then never did. She never told you what happened here? He asked. Ivy shook her head. Only that it was important. That something changed after. Elias stood slowly. Come with me. And as he led her down the long, quiet hallway toward the guest room that had been closed for over 10 years, a single thought looped through his mind. What had Clara been hiding all this time? Behind that door, he was about to find out. The hallway to Clara's old room felt like walking through time. Elias hadn't stepped foot in it since that weekend so long ago. The weekend that had left him with more questions than answers, and an ache he never truly admitted to anyone, not even himself. The walls were still lined with art from his early days. Abstract pieces that now felt hollow. The house had been remodeled several times since, but this particular guest room had remained untouched, as if preserved by invisible hands. Out of guilt, maybe, or fear. Ivy walked beside him, her small hand trailing along the smooth walls, eyes scanning everything as if searching for the invisible traces of her mother's presence. Elias paused outside the door, the brass handle catching a sliver of morning sunlight. His fingers hovered for a second too long before finally turning it. The door creaked open. Dust hung in the air like memories that had settled and refused to leave. The curtains were drawn, dimming the space in a soft gray hue. Everything was just as Clara had left it. The soft green scarf draped over the chair, a forgotten paperback book on the nightstand, and a tiny pressed flower, browned with time, lying between the pages. Ivy stepped in first, cautiously, reverently, as if entering a sacred space. Was this really her room? She asked. Elias nodded. Only for a weekend. But yes. He walked over to the dresser and opened the top drawer. It was empty except for a faded note card with Clara's handwriting. Sometimes the things we never say are the ones that echo the loudest. He closed the drawer slowly, heart pounding. Why had she written that? What had she meant? He remembered her being quiet that weekend, a little more withdrawn than usual. He remembered thinking she was about to tell him something, but he had been too busy talking about expansion plans, investor calls, and international opportunities. He had missed something. Something big. Ivy walked to the bed and ran her hand along the comforter. She always smelled like vanilla and books, she whispered. This room smells like her? A little. Elias swallowed hard. She had that scent when we were young too. She used to leave traces of it on everything she touched. Ivy sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb anything. Why did you and Mom stop talking? The question was innocent, but it stabbed like a knife. We were different people back then, Elias said. I thought I needed to chase the world to feel whole. And she stayed behind. I never asked her why. But you loved her? Yes. I did. He sat in the nearby armchair, the one she had once curled into with tea and a journal. I just didn't know how to love her the way she needed me to. Ivy looked over. She said people leave sometimes because they think they're doing the right thing, but it doesn't mean they stop loving you. He nodded slowly. She was wise. She was lonely, Ivy corrected. Even when she smiled, I could tell. Elias looked down at his hands. They were calloused not from labor but from years of clenching too tightly onto everything that couldn't fill the void inside him. Business, power, success, all of it glittering. None of it healing. He stood and walked to the bookshelf. The books were dusty, but one looked different, cleaner, less faded. He pulled it out, a photo album, not his. Inside were pictures of Clara, older than he remembered her, fuller in the cheeks, laughter lines beginning to form. But it was the photos that followed that took his breath away. Ivy as a baby wrapped in Clara's arms. Ivy with birthday hats, with crayons, with scraped knees and missing teeth. Ivy holding a paper crown made of foil and string. A life he had never known existed, laid bare before him in still images. His throat tightened. Why didn't she tell me? He whispered aloud. Ivy looked up from the bed. She said she tried once. She wrote you a letter, but she wasn't sure you'd read it. Then she got scared. She said she didn't want to be a burden. She wouldn't have been, Elias said, more to himself than her. She never was. They sat in silence, the unspoken truths filling the space between them. Finally, Ivy slid off the bed and walked over to him. Can I ask you something else? Anything. Did you ever want a daughter? Elias hesitated, then knelt down to her level. I didn't think I could be the kind of man a daughter needed. But right now, more than anything, I want to try. She stared at him, long and searching, as if waiting to see if the promise would break before it even formed. Then I want to stay, she said softly. Elias nodded, his voice choked with emotion. Then stay. Just then, something caught Ivy's eye. She moved toward the nightstand and opened the drawer. Inside was a sealed envelope. Her name was written on it in Clara's handwriting. To Ivy, for when I'm gone. Her fingers trembled as she picked it up. Elias stepped closer, eyes fixed on the letter. Do you want to open it now? He asked gently. Ivy looked up, her expression unreadable. Yes, she said, and as she began to unfold the letter, both of them knew whatever was inside would change everything. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. Ivy stared at it for a moment, her little fingers tracing the edges of her name in her mother's looping handwriting. It was smudged slightly at the corners, as if Clara had once hesitated too, holding it in the same way, with a weight that wasn't physical. The room had gone still. Even the air seemed to stop moving, as if it too waited for what was inside. Elias sat beside her on the bed, close enough to offer comfort, but not too close to intrude. He knew this wasn't his moment. It was hers. With slow, careful movements, Ivy slipped her finger under the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded letter, handwritten front and back. She unfolded it and began to read aloud, her voice fragile, like glass barely holding together. My sweet Ivy, if you are reading this, then I am no longer with you. At least not in the way you need. And I'm sorry. I wish more than anything that I could still be there, holding you, tucking you in, singing our silly songs. But life doesn't always let us choose the ending. Ivy's lips trembled. She paused to take a breath. I want to tell you something important. Something I never had the courage to tell you while I was alive. You have a father. His name is Elias Monroe. Ivy glanced up at Elias. He sat very still, his face unreadable, but his eyes shimmered slightly. He didn't leave us, Ivy. He never knew about you. I made that decision. I kept our life quiet, small, and far away from him. Not out of hatred, but because I was afraid. Elias was always chasing something bigger, always looking toward the future. And I didn't know how to ask him to stay in the present. I watched him become the man the world now sees. I was proud of him. But I knew he wasn't ready for the kind of life I had chosen. The kind that meant diapers and midnight fevers and dancing in the kitchen just because. I wanted to protect you from the possibility that he might say no. So I never gave him the chance to say yes. Ivy's voice broke there. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she handed the letter to Elias. I can't read anymore, she whispered. Elias took the paper gently. His eyes scanned the familiar handwriting, so full of grace, so full of regret. I always meant to find the right moment, Clara had written, but the right moment kept passing me by. And then the doctors gave me the truth, and I realized there was no more time to be afraid. So I'm giving you back to him, Ivy, not as a burden, but as a gift. You are brave and beautiful and wild in all the best ways. He doesn't know it yet, but you're about to change him. Elias folded the letter and set it down on the bed. The silence that followed was thick-aching. I'm sorry, he said softly, his voice cracking for the first time. I'm so sorry she did this alone, and I'm sorry I wasn't there to help either of you. Ivy nodded, wiping her cheeks with her sleeve. She wasn't mad at you. Ever. She said some love stories don't have an ending. They just change shapes. Elias smiled faintly, but it was laced with pain. She was always better with words. Did you really love her? Ivy asked again, this time not as a child seeking comfort, but as someone wanting to understand the world. I did. I still do in some way, Elias said honestly. And if I had known about you, everything would have been different. Ivy stared at the letter for a long time. Do you think she's watching us? I think if there's any justice in the universe. Elias whispered, she's right here, in this room, in your eyes. Ivy reached over and took his hand, small, warm, and trusting. She said, I'd change you? He chuckled softly, a sound more broken than amused. You already are. They sat like that for a while, neither speaking, just sharing the quiet. A different kind of silence now, not empty but full. Full of unsaid things, full of what-ifs, full of new beginnings. Later that afternoon, Ivy wandered through the garden behind the estate, a place filled with trimmed hedges and lifeless statues. Elias walked a few steps behind her, watching her inspect flowers like she'd never seen so many at once. This place is so quiet, she said. It was built that way, Elias replied. I didn't think I needed noise. Mom said life needs music. Elias knelt beside her, plucking a small wildflower that had sprung up between the carefully sculpted shrubs. Your mom was right about a lot of things. She smiled. Maybe we can make this place louder. He looked at her, really looked at her. A little girl who had lost everything, yet still carried the power to remake something broken. Maybe this estate, this life, wasn't meant to stay as it was. Maybe we can, he agreed. Then, just as the sun dipped low and colored the world in gold, Ivy turned to him and asked, can we visit where she's buried? Elias froze. He hadn't asked where Clara was laid to rest. He hadn't dared. But now he would have to face it. Yes, he said slowly. We'll go tomorrow. But what neither of them knew was that the grave wouldn't be what they expected. And something Clara left behind would change everything again. The next morning arrived in a hush of gray light and heavy skies, as if the heavens were preparing for something sacred. Ivy dressed in silence, pulling on a wool coat that had once belonged to Clara, sleeves rolled twice at the ends to fit her arms. She tied her damp hair into 2 uneven braids, just like her mother used to do for her. Elias stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching quietly. He hadn't slept much. His mind had cycled through memories of Clara like a broken film reel. Unfinished moments, half-formed words, the soft way she used to say his name when she was trying not to cry. I'm ready, Ivy said, clutching the envelope with Clara's letter. She hadn't let it out of her sight since reading it. The ride into the small New England town was long and quiet. The Bentley moved smoothly across wet roads lined with trees beginning to burn orange and red with the early signs of fall. Ivy watched out the window, fingers tapping nervously on her lap. Elias didn't speak much. There were no words gentle enough for what they were about to do. Clara had been buried in a modest cemetery just outside of Norwich, tucked between 2 hills and a grove of willows that looked like they were always weeping. The car pulled to a slow stop by the black gate, and Ivy stepped out first, her boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. Elias followed, buttoning his coat against the sharp wind. She used to bring me here sometimes, Ivy murmured as they walked the path. Before she got really sick, she'd sit by that tree. She pointed to a tall maple with curling bark, and tell me stories about angels that couldn't fly but walked beside you instead. Elias's throat closed. He followed her silently through the rows of headstones until she stopped at a small granite marker nestled beneath a weeping willow. The name etched into it was clear and simple: Clara Maywell, beloved mother, artist, dreamer. There was no mention of wife, no mention of love lost or stories untold. Just 3 quiet truths. Ivy kneeled before the grave and laid down the envelope. I brought her letter, she whispered. I think she'd want it to rest with her now. Elias stood a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, heart thudding like it didn't belong to him. He stared at the name, trying to reconcile it with the vibrant woman he had once known. The one who had made pancakes at midnight and painted flowers on her bedroom ceiling, because she said dreams needed color. The one who had raised a child with so much love and silence, never once asking for help. You were better than all of us, he murmured under his breath. You deserved more. Ivy stood and wiped her eyes. She always wanted to be buried near trees. She said they remembered things people forgot. She was right, Elias replied. But just as they turned to leave, a second marker, smaller, barely visible under the overgrown grass to the right of Clara's grave. She stepped closer, squinting. Elias, she said softly. What is this? He followed her gaze and knelt down beside her. The stone was weathered and chipped, no flowers, no signs of visits. Just a simple inscription: E.M., born and gone 2017. His blood ran cold. What? His voice cracked as he reached forward to clear the leaves and dirt. The stone was barely held together, edges crumbling. E.M., that's your initials? Ivy whispered. Was it someone else named like you? No. Elias breathed. His heart raced. His hands trembled. It's not someone else. He stared at the date, 2017. That was 8 years ago. Ivy would have been a baby then, and Clara had been alone. Suddenly, a memory surged back. A call from an unknown number years ago. A voicemail left but never listened to. He had been traveling for a conference in Zurich. Caught up in deals, deadlines. The number had come from a town in Connecticut. He had ignored it. She had another child, Elias said, the words almost sticking in his throat. Or maybe a miscarriage. Or a stillbirth. I don't know. But it had my initials. He reached for the small stone again, brushing the worn letters with a reverence that a man gives to a prayer he'll never understand. She named them after me. Evie's eyes filled with tears. Do you think she lost them alone? I think she carried too much by herself, he whispered. More than she should have ever had to. The grief hit him like a wave. Not just for Clara, but for a child he never knew existed, for all the time lost, all the love unspent, all the years carved out by silence and pride. Elias knelt beside both graves and lowered his head. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice barely audible. I should have come sooner. I should have known. Ivy rested her small hand on his back, and for a moment, it wasn't a millionaire or a CEO kneeling in the cold. It was just a man broken open by love and loss. When they finally walked away, the wind picked up gently, swirling around the trees. But neither of them noticed a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the second grave's marker. Weathered, faded, nearly lost to time. Tomorrow, someone would find it, and the words written on it would rewrite everything. The storm outside had settled into a gentle drizzle, but inside Michael's estate, the silence was loud. Little Ava sat curled on the plush armchair across from the fireplace, her hands clasped around a cup of hot chocolate that had gone cold. Michael sat across from her, stiff in posture but restless in spirit. He had spent the last 2 nights lying awake, trying to process everything the girl had said, and more importantly, what she hadn't. He knew grief, knew how it hollowed you out, left you functioning in body but empty in soul. But Ava's grief had a different kind of weight. It was quiet and steady, like someone used to carrying sorrow in small, careful pieces. Michael had tried not to pry, respecting the boundaries of a child who had clearly gone through more than she could articulate. But the questions gnawed at him like a tide that refused to recede. Why had her mother sent her to him? What history did they share that he had no memory of? And most urgently, why did Ava flinch every time someone raised their voice, even slightly? Ava noticed him looking. Her eyes, large and brown like her mother's, blinked up at him. You're wondering why I'm here, aren't you? She said quietly. Michael hesitated. I'm trying to understand, he admitted. Ava nodded and turned to stare into the fireplace. Mom used to talk about you when she thought I was asleep. She never said your name, just the man I should have told everything to, she said. She loved you once, that you had dreams, that she was afraid she'd ruin them. So she left. Michael's heart thudded in his chest. Her words sank into him like stones in a lake, sending ripples through every guarded part of his being. She left because she thought she'd ruin my dreams. Ava gave a tiny shrug. She thought she wasn't good enough. She thought you'd move on and do great things. And you did, didn't you? Her voice was soft but held a piercing edge. But she never stopped loving you. Not for a second. Michael leaned forward, elbows on his knees, the weight of years pressing on his shoulders. Why didn't she tell me about you? Ava looked down at her hands. Because of who your parents were, I think. She told me they wouldn't have accepted her. She said, you came from a world that didn't have room for someone like us. The memory of his cold, corporate upbringing flooded back. His father's voice, clipped and cold. You don't build empires by chasing fairy tales, Michael. He had been so focused on earning his father's approval, so focused on becoming worthy. He hadn't noticed who he lost along the way. She told me once, Ava whispered, that if anything ever happened to her, if she couldn't keep me safe, that I should find you. She said you were the only one in the world who would protect me the way she would. I didn't understand what she meant until... Her voice cracked, and she quickly wiped a tear from her cheek. Michael stood and crossed to her slowly. He knelt before her, placing a gentle hand on her small, trembling fingers. I should have found you both. I should have known. I'm so sorry, Ava. She looked up at him, studying his face like it was a puzzle she was learning to solve. Are you going to send me away? The question hit him harder than he expected. He had once thought his world had no space for surprises, no place for children or the kind of love that interrupted spreadsheets and boardroom meetings. But looking at Ava, this small, brave piece of the past he'd unknowingly helped create, he realized how utterly wrong he had been. No, he said firmly. You're not going anywhere. For the first time, a tiny smile appeared on her lips, but it quickly faded when a loud knock echoed through the foyer. Michael stood and walked toward the door, puzzled. He wasn't expecting anyone. When he opened it, a man in a gray suit stood on the porch, holding a leather folder and wearing a grim expression. Mr. Whitmore, the man said. I'm with Child Protective Services. We received an anonymous report about an unregistered minor living on your premises. Michael's spine straightened. Ava is my daughter. The man flipped through his folder. There's no record of paternity. No legal guardianship filed. Until we verify her identity and safety, I'll need to take her into protective custody. Behind him, Ava had come to the doorway. Her hand clutched Michael's sleeve. Please don't let them take me, she whispered. Please. Michael's jaw clenched as he faced the agent. You're not taking her anywhere. Not until I speak to my lawyer. But as he said the words, the agent's gaze hardened. If you resist, Mr. Whitmore, we'll be forced to involve the authorities. Michael stared at the man, then down at Ava, whose eyes brimmed with fear. Something deeper than rage stirred within him. Something primal. He would not lose her. Not now. Not again. But what he didn't know was that someone had orchestrated this. Someone from his past who had everything to gain from Ava disappearing from his life, and the truth remaining buried. The rain returned that evening, draping the city in mist and sorrow. Cole stood at the balcony of his penthouse, whiskey untouched in his hand, eyes searching the skyline for answers that remained just beyond reach. He had been reviewing the letter from Clara again, its creased folds worn from his constant need to make sense of every word, every implication. The truth lingered somewhere in the silence between sentences, and it unsettled him. Meanwhile, Lily was curled on the living room couch, a children's book open on her lap. But she wasn't reading. She was watching Cole, studying him. Her little face was a map of emotions. Hope, hesitation, the deep maturity of someone who had seen more pain than any child should. Cole turned to her finally, setting the glass down untouched. Lily, he said, his voice soft. Do you remember anything about the house your mom brought you to before she passed? She nodded slowly, her eyes wide and still. It was quiet. A big gate. There were flowers in the front. She said he lives here. The man in the stories. What stories? She used to tell me stories about a man who made everything grow, who helped her once when she had nothing. She said he gave her a second chance. But he never knew it. Cole swallowed hard, his chest tightening. His past choices were ghosts that had grown legs and walked back into his life wearing a child's face. The man in the stories. He was starting to understand. Clara had loved him in silence, and he had lived in ignorance. Somewhere in their brief, painful connection, she had found something redemptive. He had simply walked away. Lily, he said carefully, crouching before her, did your mom ever talk about your father? She blinked, thinking. She said he was brave. That he didn't know about me, but he would understand when he saw me. She said he was lonely but didn't know it. Cole's breath caught. It was too precise, too familiar. Lily, do you know why she sent you here? To find him, she whispered. To find you? The room fell into silence, heavy, sacred. Later that night, Cole retreated to his study. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out an old photo album. Dust danced in the lamplight as he flipped through pages. Snapshots of his younger self, Clara in the background of some, her eyes always watching him even when he hadn't noticed. There was one photo of her sitting alone on the company steps, a cup of coffee in her hands, and the sadness in her eyes struck him like a blow. He opened his laptop and searched old employee records. Clara's file was sparse. She had asked for no public farewell, no company announcement, no trace left behind. Just like her life, quiet, careful, concealed. The next morning, Cole drove Lily to the old neighborhood where she and her mother had once lived. It was a rundown block on the edge of the city, where laundry swayed on makeshift lines and children played in cracked sidewalks. He found the apartment building. 3rd floor, Unit 302. Inside, dust coated everything like time had paused the moment Clara left. Lily walked slowly, running her fingers across a shelf filled with little treasures, pressed flowers in glass, handmade drawings, a tiny ceramic elephant. Her room was filled with pink blankets and glow. In the dark stars stuck to the ceiling. Cole stood at the doorframe overcome. There were pictures on the wall, of Lily as a baby, as a toddler, as a young girl. But one photo arrested him, a sonogram. Dated just a month after he and Clara had parted ways. He sank into the nearest chair, his head in his hands. She hadn't just hidden a child. She had carried the weight of silence for years, not out of vengeance, but out of something more powerful. Protection. Maybe even love. Do you miss her? Lily asked softly, walking toward him. Cole looked up, his eyes shining. I didn't know I had someone to miss. But now, I don't know how to stop. Lily climbed into his lap and wrapped her arms around his neck, her voice muffled by his shirt. She said you'd be sad. But she also said you'd be strong. In that moment, everything broke and remade itself inside him. The man who had built empires but failed to build a family sat, for the first time, not as a CEO but as something closer to human, closer to father. As they left the apartment, Lily paused at the door and turned to him. Can we come back again? I want to feel her. Cole nodded. We can come back whenever you want. But as they descended the stairs, a figure was waiting at the bottom. A man in a long coat, eyes hidden beneath a hat. He held something in his hand, an envelope, and he stepped forward, wordless, and handed it to Cole. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled in Alara's handwriting. "There's something you don't know about Lily. It's time." The clock ticked loudly in the silence as Henry sat across from Lily in the conservatory, an untouched cup of tea in front of him. The glass walls framed a sky growing heavy with clouds, casting muted shadows across the marble floor. Lily sat quietly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes distant, as if she were listening to a voice only she could hear. It had been 2 days since the piano incident, and neither had mentioned the photo again. But the storm that had been building between them was about to break. Henry took a deep breath. "Lily, can you tell me what you remember about your mother?" "Anything." Lily blinked slowly, then turned her eyes toward him. "She used to sing me to sleep. Not with lullabies, she'd hum movie soundtracks. She liked the old ones like The Sound of Music and Mary Poppins. Said they reminded her of hope." He swallowed hard. "She sounds kind." She was. Even when she was sick. Her voice cracked slightly. "She told me that no matter what happened, I'd never be alone. That there were people in the world who cared about me, even if I hadn't met them yet." Henry leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "Did she ever mention anyone by name?" Lily hesitated. "Just one. Once," she said. "If anything ever happens to me, and you don't know where to go, find Henry Whittaker. He'll take care of you." The words hit him like a sledgehammer. He didn't know whether to cry or scream. It wasn't just coincidence. Anna had sent her. His Anna. The woman he'd loved. The one he'd let go without asking why. All these years, he had buried the pain, convinced himself she had left and moved on without him. But now her daughter, his daughter, was sitting in his home, breathing life into ghosts. "Lily," he said slowly, "I think I might have known your mother. A long time ago." Lily's eyes brightened just slightly. "You did." He nodded. "We were very close. But something happened and I made a mistake. I let her go when I shouldn't have. She never told me she had a daughter." Lily looked down. "She was going to?" "She wrote you letters. I saw her writing them. But she never mailed them. I asked her why once and she said, some truths are too delicate to send through paper. They must be spoken face to face." Henry stood, pacing slowly. His heart pounded, memory fragments crashing like waves in his head. Anna, her laughter, her eyes. The day she'd left, her last words ringing in his ears. "Don't forget the melody." And now, all these years later, the melody had returned, in the form of a little girl. He turned back to her. "I want to show you something." He led Lily to a room at the back of the mansion. It was one he hadn't entered in years. Dust clung to the air like grief. Inside was a grand piano covered with a faded tarp. Slowly, Henry pulled it off, revealing the polished surface beneath, and the name engraved in gold. Whittaker and Rose. "She helped me design this," he said softly. "Back when I was just starting out. We dreamed of opening music schools one day. She wanted every child to have a place to find their voice." Lily walked forward, trailing her fingers over the ivory keys. She said music was like memory. That it doesn't leave you. It just waits to be heard again. Henry's voice trembled. I think you're my daughter, Lily." She turned to look at him, her eyes wide, searching. "You really think so?" He nodded, tears finally breaking free. "And I think I've failed you both by not knowing sooner. But I don't want to fail you now." The storm outside had finally broken, rain pattering against the windows like applause. Lily walked toward him, hesitant at first, and then with certainty. She wrapped her small arms around his waist and buried her face in his chest. "I missed you," she whispered. He held her tightly. "I missed you too, even when I didn't know I had." As they stood there, in a room long forgotten, surrounded by echoes of lost dreams, a quiet hope began to grow. But just as Henry was about to speak again, his phone buzzed violently in his pocket. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and felt the color drain from his face. A message, from an unknown number. 4 words, "She isn't who you think." Oh, of all the letters he had ever signed, none trembled in his hands like the one he found on his desk that morning. It wasn't printed on fine letterhead or wrapped in a sleek envelope. It was a simple, crumpled page from a child's notebook. In blue crayon it read, "I'm sorry for hiding. I just didn't want you to cry anymore. Love, Alara." Thomas sat in stunned silence, the letter weighing on him more than any corporate deal ever had. The house was quiet, the morning sun filtered through the wide bay windows, yet nothing felt warm. Alara was gone. After the confrontation the night before, she had slipped away while he was still speaking to Helen. No one had seen her leave. Security footage showed her quietly walking out the side gate, clutching her small backpack. No coat, no phone, no clue where she'd go. He had failed her. The man who had conquered boardrooms, outwitted competitors, and amassed billions was now pacing his living room, terrified. Every scenario ran through his mind. Accidents, strangers, freezing streets. He called the police, his PR team, the mayor, even his estranged brother who still ran community outreach in the city. No one had seen her. Helen stood nearby, unsure whether to speak. She'd known Thomas for years, but never had she seen him so unmoored. His confidence dissolved into panic. "We need to stay calm," she offered gently. "She's a smart girl. She knows how to take care of herself. She's 8. Thomas snapped, his voice cracking. "She shouldn't have to know how." Helen placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Then let's do something. Let's find her. Not just with money or security teams. With real people. With love." They started with her favorite places. The bench in the park where they'd shared ice cream. The old bookstore with the cat in the window. The playground where she'd once climbed the slide the wrong way just to make him laugh. She wasn't in any of them. Hours passed. Dusk fell. Then night. The temperature dropped. And with every degree, the fear in Thomas's chest turned to dread. He returned home hollowed out. That's when the doorbell rang. He raced to it, flung it open, only to find a neighbor holding Alara's jacket. "We found this on the curb 3 blocks down," the woman said, breathless. "Isn't this hers?" Thomas's heart stopped. He took the jacket, recognizing the unicorn patch Alara had ironed on herself. It was damp, a torn sleeve. But no blood, that was something at least. He whispered a thank you and ran inside. Helen was already on the phone with the police, but Thomas had a strange instinct, a pull, a memory. He walked into the hallway where Alara had once traced the wallpaper with her fingers, curious about the vines and roses. He noticed now that part of the paneling near the floor was misaligned. Kneeling down, he tugged it gently. It popped open. Behind it was a crawl space, barely wide enough for a small child. "Alara," he called into the dark. No answer. Grabbing a flashlight, he peered inside, and there she was. Curled up asleep, clutching a photo of her mother and a sock puppet Thomas had bought her on their first outing. Her face was stained with tears, her cheeks red from the cold. But she was alive. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He simply reached in and whispered, "I'm here, baby. I'm here." Her eyes fluttered open, frightened for a second. Then they recognized him. "Daddy," she croaked. It broke him. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her against his chest, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his ribs. He carried her to the couch, wrapped her in a blanket, and held her as if the world might take her again. "I thought you didn't want me," she murmured. "I thought I made everything worse." "No," he whispered into her hair. "You're the only thing that's ever made it better." Helen watched from the hallway, tears in her eyes, and quietly walked away, giving them privacy. Later that night, after Alara had eaten and fallen asleep again in his arms, Thomas sat in silence, not with fear now, but with resolve. She had trusted him, even after everything. She had come to him. He would not fail her again. But as he kissed her forehead and looked at the photograph she had clutched, his former love smiling gently at the camera, he saw something he had missed before. A signature in the corner, his own mother's initials. His heart skipped. Why was her name on this photo? The past he thought he'd buried was whispering from the shadows again, and it was time to listen. The day broke softly, sunlight filtering through the long windows of Charles Whitmore's estate, spilling gold onto the polished floors. For the first time in years, the house felt less like a mausoleum of regrets and more like a place where life could grow again. Charles sat at the grand dining table, his fingers curled around a cup of warm tea. Across from him, Lily chattered gently to Maria about the dream she had. Something about stars dancing in the sky and her mother smiling. The sound was music, delicate and healing. The past few weeks had stitched together a new kind of life. They weren't a family by blood, but there was something deeper forming, tender, fragile, but real. Still, questions lingered. Who was Lily's father? Why did her mother Sarah send her here and not anywhere else? The answers had eluded them, buried under layers of secrets, lost letters, and an unspoken past. That morning, Maria stepped into Charles's office, a thin file in her hand, her face pale. "Charles," she said quietly, "you need to see this." Inside the file were photocopies of old documents Sarah had kept hidden, letters, birth records, and photos yellowed with time. The truth was wrapped in the pages like a sleeping child. Charles read them slowly, his breath catching when he reached the last letter, addressed to him in Sarah's handwriting. "Charles, if you're reading this, it means I've gone and Lily found her way to you. She deserves more than I could give her. More than I had the strength to give. The day I walked away, I never told you the truth. She's yours. I was scared, Charles. I didn't know if you'd want her. I didn't know if the man who built an empire would ever want a daughter born of a love he buried. But Lily is yours in every way. Her laughter, her eyes, the way she notices the smallest beauty in the world. She is the best part of me and of you. Love her. Don't let her feel the emptiness I carried for so long, Sarah." The world went silent. The weight of those words pressed against his chest like a tidal wave breaking through stone. His mind reeled back. Every gesture Lily had made, every moment they shared, every time he had felt an inexplicable pull toward her. And now it made sense. It all made sense. She was his daughter. Charles stumbled out of the office like a man reborn, carrying the truth like a torch. He found Lily in the garden, sitting on the bench beneath the cherry blossom tree, her tiny hands feeding breadcrumbs to the birds. He knelt beside her, his voice trembling. "Lily, there's something I need to tell you." She looked up with wide eyes. "Are you okay, Mr. Charles?" He smiled through the tears. "Better than okay. I found a letter from your mom. She wanted you to be here for a reason." Lily's expression grew still. "Because you're kind." He shook his head softly. "Because I'm your father?" The silence between them cracked open like a dawn. Lily blinked, her mouth slightly parted. You're my dad." He nodded, overwhelmed. "Yes. And I am so sorry I wasn't there. I didn't know. I should have known." Lily didn't respond right away. She looked at her hands, then at the blossoms above, and then at him. "That's why Mom said I'd be safe with you. She told me I had your eyes." Charles laughed, tears rolling down his cheeks. "You do. You have so much more than that. You have my heart, Lily. All of it." Till she threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tightly, as if the universe had just righted its greatest wrong. The wind moved gently through the trees, the blossoms drifting around them like falling stars. Weeks passed, and the mansion became a home. The rooms that once echoed with silence now filled with laughter, music, and warmth. Lily brought life to every corner, and Charles began seeing the world again through her eyes. Curious, hopeful, and unafraid. He created a scholarship fund in Sarah's name for young mothers. He turned the upstairs guest room into Lily's own paradise, complete with bookshelves, art supplies, and a telescope. They read bedtime stories, painted wild landscapes, and once even had a pancake-eating contest that ended in syrup-covered chaos. But most of all, they healed. One rainy night, as they sat watching the fireplace crackle, Lily whispered, "Do you think Mom sees us?" Charles wrapped a blanket around her and nodded. "Yes, and I think she's proud. Of both of us." Lily snuggled closer. "I'm glad she sent me to you, even if it was hard." Charles kissed her forehead. "Me too, Lily. Me too. You were the greatest gift she ever gave me." Outside, the rain tapped gently on the windows. Inside, there was peace, love, and a bond that no time, no lie, and no absence could ever break again. And for the first time in decades, Charles Whitmore felt whole.
One stormy night, a little girl knocks on a millionaire CEO's door. With trembling lips, she whispers words that shatter his world. "Mom just died. She sent me to you." What follows is a heart-wrenching journey of secrets, broken pasts, and an unexpected bond that could heal wounds money could never touch. This is a story of pain, love, and a truth too powerful to ignore.